We are just delighted to have you here this evening, this afternoon. My name is Alice Sharp, and I'm the Development Officer for Durham County Library. And I have to tell you something. My colleague was she was fretting, oh, there won't be people here, there won't be people. I had never had any doubt we would have a full house to hear Walker and see Carol's documentary and Andrew, and to hear about him and the marvelous work that they had done in Liberty Warehouse over many years. So I thank all of you for coming out this evening. But first, before we get to the heart of the matter, I have to do my little plugs for not only upcoming humanities programs, but for the entity that makes these programs possible, and that's Durham Library Foundation. How many of you out there are Durham Library Foundation donors? Raise your hands, because I know you, and I know you're out there. Well, I want to say thank you, and for the folks who are seated around you, thank those people who raised their hands for making this possible. And the next time, I want you to be able to raise your hand if you didn't, and we have some great materials in the back about how you can support our library, how you can support the wonderful programming that happens here, and how you can support our campaign for the library that is ongoing currently that will help to strengthen not only, well, all of the library and specifically the humanities programming. So do make sure you pick up some of that material and pay attention to it. Now, I do want to call attention to several upcoming programs. My colleague Joanne Abel is here. And Joanne, if you would stand, I want you all to give her a round of applause for the fabulous programming that Joanne is bringing to us on a very consistent basis. And before I forget, there are two people in here who need your acknowledgement as well. And one is our current library director, Tammy Baggett. Tammy, would you stand? And the other, they hate it when I do this, but the other is Dale Gaddis, our former library director, and together with you, these two ladies have built a great history here at Durham County Library and are continuing to build on it. But quickly to the upcoming programs, on this Sunday, August the 3rd, we will be remembering Freedom Summer on its 50th anniversary. And so those of you who lived through that, like I did, please come out and hear and see this wonderful program. And then along the lines of some of the things we're going to talk about tonight, and especially standing here looking to Andrew, on Tuesday, August the 5th, we will have Meet the Sculptor, Jim Gallucci. So he will be here as well. And let me just tell you about something very special. Joanne didn't ask me to mention this, but I think it is certainly worthy of letting a crowd like this know. On October 4th and 5th, we will be kicking off our semi-biennial community read. It's called Durham Reads Together. And this year we're celebrating the book March by Representative John Lewis. And we are graced, to have his presence for 2 days, October 4th and October 5th. That morning of October 4th, which is a Saturday, we will actually have a march from the library to the new civil rights mural that's being created right now. So do put that on your calendar. But if you sign up to be a Humanities Society member, you will get a wonderful brochure that's just chock full of the great programs we will have in any 3 months. So make sure you sign up so you can make sure you get that brochure. Now, to the matter at hand tonight. Walker Stone and Liberty Warehouse, Andrew Preiss, and they've all come together under a great film by Carol Thomson. So I have a little piece of paper here that Joanne asked me to read, but I'm going to embellish a little bit because I know all three of these people. So first we have Carol Thomson, is the founder of Firestream Media, and she has taught at the Center for Documentary Studies and the Community Folklife Documentary Institute for the NC Arts Council. Now that's what's written on the piece of paper here. But I want to tell you that Carol has been a fixture in downtown for how many years? 8 years. And not only, and I say a fixture because she's gotten involved, she's helping us to preserve our history, and she is a very, very much a part of creating that history. So we want to thank Carol for that. I'm going to save him for last. And next I'm going to go to Andrew. Andrew founded ARP Art Design, Andrew, wave your hand so they'll know, studio in Liberty Warehouse after graduating from Duke University. I knew why I really liked him, because he graduated from Duke. But Andrew, as well, has been a fixture in downtown. And he's been a fixture that has helped bring a vibrant life to Foster Street and now to other parts of Durham. And so, Andrew, you're going to hear more about him, but he's a great guy. Which leads me right into Walker Stone. All right, Walker. This is so much fun, but I'll read what it says here first before I talk about it. Walker Stone's grandfather was one of the partners who established the original Liberty Warehouse in 1925. When Stone saw the decline in tobacco, he repurposed the warehouse for the arts and rebirth of downtown Durham. I want to focus on that last part, the revitalization of downtown, the rebirth of the arts, because without Walker's vision and without him saying, well, you know, the warehouse, we can do something else in here. We can do something else. We've sold the tobacco, but we can do something else. And Walker is pretty, I won't say single-handedly, because there are lots of people in this room who have helped the revitalization of downtown. But for that corridor, that section right across from what in Durham Central Park, across from the Farmers Market Pavilion, Liberty Warehouses, Walker he kept that area alive. And it's because of him that we have the vibrancy that's going on right now. So I thought I'd say one nice thing about you before the night's over. All right. So first of all, we're going to see some clips. Carol, this is a work in progress, and she's not totally finished. And please make sure that you sign up for her email list as well that's in the back. But we're going to be able to see some of the clips of Carol's documentary. So Carol?
Hello, and thanks for coming out tonight. I just want to start to say that my documentary is definitely a work in progress, and it won't be finished for about 2 more years. I want to time the finish of it with the finishing of the new development at Liberty. So at this point, I'm still in production. That means I'm still actively shooting, and I haven't really started editing. But for tonight, I went ahead and edited 2 different clips that will give you an idea of what's going to be in the documentary. They're 2 short clips, total of about 6 minutes. So most of the time tonight we're going to spend talking about it, and we'll watch them and talk more afterwards.
Our warehouses were always Liberty, and there was an old Liberty down the street from where we are now that went out of existence in the 40s, and then we moved up here on the hill. My daddy bought his partners out and brought his brother into business with him. Later on, after I was in the business and had worked a lot of years, my uncle died, and so I bought him out. And then a little later on, I bought my father out, and so at the very last, it was just me. His full day. I mean, things began to stir around there around 6 in the morning, and then during the mornings and early afternoon, sales were going on. And then at night after the sale, the companies sent for their tobacco that they had bought, hauled it out to the priories or wherever they took it to. And then we unloaded farmers till late at night, filling the floor back up. So it was a long day.
Sold American.
I guess the bank started coming in the late 50s. We've probably innovated that, and then of course the others found out we were doing it, and they put pressure on their banks to do the same thing. We did the whole transaction for the farmer, sale, and then handed him a check that same very day for what his tobacco brought. And then they could, of course, go uptown and spend the money. It was a big time in Durham when the tobacco market was going on, because there was a lot of money spent here. The area was dying and beginning to look a little bit seedy, and we always had renters across the back because that wasn't involved in the floor upstairs where we sold tobacco. And some of them began to move out, and then some of the metal artists were the first that came along and started asking me about where they could rent space.
Well, that's good.
And so we worked it out.
1999, I moved my business into the Liberty Warehouse with another metal worker whose name is Jimmy Alexander. And at the time, the Liberty was not empty, but wasn't being utilized for anything very creative. It was just storage space for the Marriott Hotel, and Walker Stone had an interest in sort of bringing a more creative group of people into the warehouse. So we were looking, the Arts Council was thinking about moving their clay studio in there, and then Ann Woodward was looking at moving the scrap exchange out of their location at Northgate. So there was several people, and then a couple of other individual artists were also looking for studio space at the time. So it all sort of happened fairly quickly. I think Walker was excited about it. The people who moved in were certainly happy to have, new spaces, and it was exciting. Yeah, it was a good time there. It was a family. The scrap exchange would typically have an art opening, music. Liberty Arts was often open on third Fridays. There was always a lot more foot traffic on that evening, and for so long there had just been desolation downtown. So to have families walking around and kids in strollers, and people excited about being downtown, it was sort of a novelty, but it was certainly wonderful to see it happening.
All right. I want to start with Carol and to talk a little bit about how did you decide to focus in on Liberty Warehouse? When did that all come together?
We can just turn the projector off? Okay. You turned it back on. That's okay. So when did I get the idea to make a documentary about Liberty Warehouse? Well, actually, in May of 2011, when it made the headlines, when the roof collapsed, and we heard about the metal artists that were in there having to leave, it got a lot of attention. And at that point, I mean, I was reading the paper, and I didn't know much about Liberty Warehouse until then. And I got very interested. I'm very interested in downtown Durham's history. My first documentary project was about the American Tobacco Trail. I learned a lot about the history at the time, but I'd learned about the history of the tobacco factories and really nothing about the auction warehouses. So I was really intrigued when I found out that Liberty was the last standing of 13 auction houses. And at that time, when the roof collapsed, no one knew what was going to happen, and we all knew there was a chance that we were going to lose Liberty, and I got really interested. And I contacted Andrew. I knew him a little bit, and then I met Walker, and I realized that, you know, there was a pretty good story here that needed to be documented. I felt like the history needed to be preserved, and that was what really drove me. And can I say one thing? I want to say, in the clips that you saw, there's a lot of archival footage from, you know, a long time ago, but there's also a lot of footage and some photographs for more recent times. And I just want to say that there are a lot of folks in the documentary community that have given me footage to use, and this project would not be what it was without that. And I just want to, I didn't have any credits because these are just clips, but I want to thank everybody that that have, and there's more, there's lots more, and some of it we'll talk about, projects, things that happened in the warehouse. So I feel very fortunate that I have a lot of footage to use.
Andrew, I'd like to ask you, when Walker approached you about coming into Liberty Warehouse, what was your reaction to that?
Well, actually, we'd been renting space from Vega Metals for about 8 years before space constraints dictated that we find another place to move into. So we started looking around, and we knew that there was space in the warehouse, and so we approached Walker about the possibility of moving in there. And at about the same time, Ann Woodward and Susan Grossman from the Durham Arts Council, everybody was kind of looking to expand their studio spaces or retail spaces. So, I mean, Walker was very receptive about the idea and was, you know, welcoming to the idea of having, you know, sort of a rebirth of the warehouse. It had been used, but not really used to its potential for quite a while. I'm sure he can expand on that some more, but it just, the timing was right for it. There was space there, and it needed a lot of upfitting, but it was he was offering it to us at a very reasonable rate, and just worked out really well for everybody.
Walker,
Yes, ma'am.
tell us a little bit about Liberty Warehouse. Tell us about it.
Well, you've already told them the whole history.
Well, I'm sure you can add a little something.
Granddaddy came in 25, and it's been going on.
You need the mic.
Been going on ever since.
You want to hold that one?
And
They want it real close.
this rain. Well, I'm not used to this sort of thing, and she built me up so much I really don't know what to say anymore. But anyway, I've known her the whole time, and Andrew, and the scrap exchange lady. You know, that picture of you look young. That was not that long ago. You still look good, but I mean, back then,
Walker, we had a few of you in there when you were pretty young.
well, sort of. I've aged a whole lot since then. But anyway,
A bit about what a day at Liberty Warehouse was like and what it meant to this community.
well, back when tobacco was king, and it was for North Carolina, and helped save the nation, you know, and during the Confederacy, Durham is where tobacco really got its start. And so opening day in Durham was a glorious occasion all the merchants got in behind the opening, and all the politicians came out of the woodwork and visited the opening sale, and it was an exciting time. And farmers brought their kids to town and went up to Belt Licket's and all those old stores downtown. They moved away way back, but anyway, in downtown Durham started going back, and after a few years, in the latter years, I'd say in the late 70s and 80s, there was so much government interference in the tobacco business, and along with stabilization, they helped do away with the tobacco auction system, which was a sad time for all of us that had, the auction system had been going on for like 100 years, and all of a sudden it was no more. There are no more small farmers left anywhere in North Carolina, Georgia, or Virginia. They're all great big producers, and they have to deal with one company for whatever they're going to get out of that tobacco. And of course, we think the auction system was a better way to do it, but it is no more. But anyway, the warehouses handled the whole transaction for the farmer. He brought his tobacco to us to sell for him, and the companies came to our warehouse. Bobby Ross with Liggett and many others. There were about 10 or 12 people following the sale, various companies, and they were bidding against each other, so we felt like that the farmer got a better price that way. And so it was an exciting time, and it went on for, I'd say the 50s, 60s, and 70s were the boom times. But it had been going on a long time before that. When my granddaddy came here, he came from Apex, had a little warehouse down there, and Durham seemed to be a better place to where tobacco really was. And so they closed the Apex market and never had another one. But Durham became the biggest market in the Middle Belt. There are 5 flue-cured belts, and the Middle Belt was one of them, and Durham was the biggest market in the Middle Belt. And we had 3 sets of buyers, so that meant 3 sales going on at the same time around in Durham. And so it was just a busy, busy time from early in the morning till late at night. We usually opened on day after Labor Day and ran up until about Thanksgiving as a general rule. And folks didn't think I had to work but about 3 months a year, but that wasn't quite true. Even after tobacco, I had a lot of roof work to do. And I got a little bit tired of the roof work, so these big operators came in and wanted to buy the place, and I really didn't want to sell it, but they just kept on, and finally I did sell it in about, I guess, 2005 maybe. Anyway, they never touched the roof again, but a 2.5 acre roof you have to work on constantly. But they didn't, and then some of it fell in, and that's pretty much the beginning of the end of Liberty Warehouses.
Talk a little louder, Walter.
All right. Boy, you are getting old, aren't you?
Now, there were other warehouses. Liberty was that end of Mississippi.
There were several firms downtown. There were 4 firms downtown, and then one out in the edge of town. The Roycroft, the Star, the Mangum, and Liberty were the downtown warehouses, and they were never kept up, and they hit the ground a long time ago, just naturally. And so I stayed around because I kept my building up and as best I could, and rented out space. And after a while, there was some guys walking through downtown and decided they wanted to wake it up a little bit. You all read about them, and then all of a sudden, Jack Preiss and Frank DePascal, I mean, talked CCB into leaving a mark on Durham when they closed. So they built a foundry that tacked on to the end of the warehouse. Of course, Andrew and Jimmy and a lot of other people were involved in that, but Jack and his buddy helped that come to pass. And it is a good thing, and I hope it can be saved. They're going to tear down the warehouse, but they claim they're going to leave that brick wall, and hopefully the foundry can stay as sort of a monument to maybe the CCB or how it used to be. But anyway, it's a good thing, and there's some good people involved in it, and so maybe it can be saved. We hope so. I hope the man that bought the warehouse last will decide to help save it, and I think he will. He's a good fellow.
Great. Andrew, tell us a little bit more about how your dad started the foundry and how that came to be. And for those of you who don't know, Major was actually poured in that foundry. Major, our bull that sits up on CCB Plaza, was actually poured there. So you want to tell us a little bit about how that came about? Because that, too, is part of Liberty Warehouse history.
Yeah, I can do that a little bit. I was only sort of an advisor in the early stages of the planning of the foundry, so I don't personally do a lot of foundry work myself. Mm-hmm. I helped when we were sort of planning the idea of building a foundry and how that might come to pass. I helped out a little bit, but that was not really my area directly. I did help them some. I guess about a year after we moved in, around 2000, the discussion started about building a foundry and what might be involved with that. Mike Waller was working at Vega Metals at the time, and he had some experience in workings of a foundry. So he came on board, and Kate Dobbs-Ariel, who has been involved in the art scene in Durham for a very long time, got involved with some of the administrative tasks, and my dad and Frank DePascal approached Dean Hamrick at CCB and secured a very generous donation from them to actually build the building and buy the equipment and commission the bull. So there was a I guess over the course of a couple of years in the early 2000s that process got moving along, and then I think the building was dedicated in 2004. Jack? Okay. That's my dad. So then, that has been sort of a separate nonprofit that's been was one of the, anchor artists along the strip of Foster Street, including Tim Werrell, who was doing sculpture work, and myself and Jimmy Alexander, and the clay studio with the Arts Council was doing class work and making things, and the Scrap Exchange had creative work going on, classes and people coming in to, teachers getting supplies. It was a pretty vibrant scene. It was exciting to be on Foster Street in what had been sort of a very quiet part of town for a long time.
Thank you. We always have questions from our audience, so I think this is just as good a time as any to entertain some of your questions and then have each of the three respond. So, are there questions out there? All right.
There's one here.
I've always been curious. The Liberty Warehouse is huge. It's a big building. Was it built that way in one fell sweep, or was it in parts?
It was built in two separate instances. The one half was built in 1938. We're talking about the structure that we're speaking of. Old Liberty was down the street, and that no longer existed. And then in about 1950, the other half was built. So it was really two buildings, but no wall between. And my daddy owned half, and my uncle owned half. And then when my uncle died, I bought Uncle out, and later on bought my dad out. So it was two buildings, but it was really just one huge open space upstairs. And then, of course, we had some rental space along the edges and in the back. And they sort of came alive when Andrew and Scrap Exchange and Clay Studio wanted to get going, so I tried to help them do that.
In the auction system, how did the individual farmers decide which warehouse to bring their tobacco? What kind of relationships did you have with them?
Well, they're all friends. And I spent the rest of the year going to visit them and promoting my business, and they had to like you or they wouldn't sell with you. So it was a year-round proposition, and so if they thought you could do it better than anybody else, that's where they sold. That's sort of the way it went. And then, of course, floor space was allotted according to how big your warehouse was, and you couldn't take care of everybody who wanted to sell with you, but those that really did want to, we took care of them.
Question. I got a question. Is there's a warehouse in Wilson Lane, Liberty 2, right?
I can't hear you.
There was a warehouse name in Wilson County, Liberty.
Joanne, can you repeat his question?
He's saying that there's a warehouse called Liberty in Wilson, and is there any connection?
No, there are several Liberty warehouses here and there, but I think my grandfather named the first one, and then it sort of caught on, and it was named about the time the Statue of Liberty was put in place, and so that's where the name came from. But there are Liberty warehouses in other parts of the country.
This is a very small question, but when we had the George Roos artistic endeavor, he painted a line across the pillars and the understory of the Liberty, which was just wonderful. That's such an evocative place, and I wondered if it's still there.
As far as I know, it's still there, but probably not for long, because they've already started taking it apart. They hadn't got down in there yet, but you could probably still see it if you could get permission to go in.
I do know that his process involved taking a photograph. That's actually what his projects were. The final part of the piece was to photograph it. So I'm sure that photograph is around.
I know you have a question, but I have a quick one myself. Walker, what was your reaction when you were approached about the George Roos project? And how many of you know what we're talking about? Great. This was an artist who came a visual. He's a photographer, but his works are just amazing. The juxtaposition of space is just wonderful. The way he colors it, and then has a certain perspective from which he will take a photo that will just knock your socks off. So when they came to you about that, what was your reaction?
Well, actually, I couldn't realize that anybody wanted to go in the basement of the warehouse and doing anything for art. But anyway, he did. And, of course, that portion of the warehouse was not being used. Interesting architecture. And he saw that, and he just went crazy, and he did a nice job down there. That was one of the nicest things I think he did in Durham.
All right, sir.
Well, actually, I have two questions now because I thought of one. First one is a little bit simpler. Has there been any movement to save the signs on the interior of the Liberty? You know, where you have the bank signs painted up and everything. I mean, even taking away huge pieces of the wood and being able to be displayed elsewhere.
Yes, definitely. I saw a couple weeks ago all those old signs loaded up in a truck, and the developer is going to save them. Last I heard, they're going to go into one of the retail spaces. I don't know if that's still the plan, but I know the developer really wants to save all that fabulous signage.
Oh, that's wonderful news. Well, I had exterior.
I think the plans are kind of evolving about the exterior, so I can't say 100%, but I know there is an effort to save some of the brick walls. The latest I heard is the brick wall along Rigsby Street with the signage there is going to stay in place, but and I think that's true.
Great. Okay. Now for the actual question. I'm just trying to get into my head a timeline. What year was the final tobacco auction in the Liberty Warehouse? And then we keep talking about the warehouse, the auctions, and then jumping to about 1999 when artists came in. And so talk to me a little bit about what was that final year of the auction warehouse, and then what were those years in between like? How did you transition from auction warehouse to
Well, for me, in 1984 was when I saw the handwriting on the wall for tobacco auction system. I decided, well, you know, I got a nice building here. I think I can do something else with it. So I portioned it off and just rented commercial space all over the upstairs. I started out with one big tenant, and it took 3 or 4 years to fill it up. But after I got it filled up, I was making a fairly decent living from the rental income. And so that's what I kept doing. And after a while, some people wanted to own it more than I wanted to keep it. I was doing a lot of roof work, and I'd get a little bit tired of it. So I'd say, well, I'll let somebody else do that. But they didn't. They bought it, though, and they paid me what I asked for it, so there's nothing I could say about whether they kept it up or not. They just decided not to, and that was their prerogative.
So when was the last tobacco auction?
1984. And then I started the rental business and just transgressed into other things.
Before I give the next question, I wanted everybody to notice the beautiful cover of the brochure. It is Bill Pope's fabulous artwork, so he's going to ask a question, but let's give him a hand for sharing this beautiful artwork with all of us.
got a question for Walker. I've always been fascinated by that little canteen or restaurant on Rigsby Street that was open until a few years ago. You could have its own documentary made about that. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of that and the type of people that went there? And I think it was open for breakfast and lunch.
Yeah, it was, and there was always a Liberty Cafe, even in the old Liberty, and then when we moved up on the hill, it followed us, and it had various operators, and the menus were pretty strange, brains and eggs and things like that, but it was an interesting time, and people around in the neighborhood that lived fairly close by usually frequented the place, and it was always busy. But it finally had to close, along with the rest of the people that were in there. But it was an interesting place. It really was. One of a kind.
One of a kind, just like you, Walker. And before we move on, I need to not correct, but just to acknowledge that this evening we have Margaret Stone, Margaret Walker's wife, and his son with us tonight. Great. Okay.
Margaret has always been a great help to me. She always worked in the office of the warehouse, and I think the farmers liked her better than they did me.
All right, next question.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
This has been a real walk down memory lane for me, and I appreciate what you were saying earlier about the farmers coming to town on opening day. Anyway, before I get started, I'm going to throw two names out at you. Willie Curran, Morris Curran.
Knew them both well.
Yep, I did too.
Well, they were competitors, but we were friends.
And I don't know if I may be the only old native Durhamite in here tonight, but
No, there are few of us out here.
but I bet there are not that many here that had to make a choice, and I would still hate to have to make the choice of priming the tobacco or working in the auction warehouse. It was both hard work, but we've got tobacco history pretty well covered in Durham, from the Duke Homestead, the Tobacco Museum, all of the repurposing of the manufacturing plants downtown, L&M and American. But this area is the one area that I think is missing in the lexicon of tobacco history. And it's something I was going to talk to Ms. Simpson about, and I'd like to talk to you sometime too. But that, to me, is the real culture of Durham. You can make the cigarettes, chewing tobacco, whatever was made, but the people that grew it, that came into town, and like you said, when they left with a pocket full of money, they'd go downtown, and that's how Durham was just, it was rich, I'll put it that way, at least around those times.
Well, Durham is where tobacco got its start, if you look back on it, and bloomed from there, right after the Civil War.
Right. And I don't know if since Liberty is the only one left, I worked in a couple of the others, and then the Star and all of that. But if you can stand down at Central Park and look all the way back up to the Y, look all the way over to the other end of Hunt Street, all the way up to the end, that's where the tobacco auction warehouses were. And I don't think people really realize how big this area was. I would say it took up maybe a fourth of the then downtown area.
That's about right.
It was huge. But anyway, I didn't mean to take up so much time, but this is so much fun. And I do want to talk to you more later, and to you too. Thank you so much.
Be glad to talk with you.
While Joanne is going to the next questioner, I actually did work in tobacco, but it was in Wilson, and I could not stand to be out in the field because of those big tobacco things. Oh, God. So I had the job of tying the tobacco and then flipping them on that long wooden pole. Yes. Hey, I was smart.
You used to bite the heads off those worms. Didn't you never learned to do that?
No, I just wanted to get away from them.
This question is for Carol. It's my understanding, that the warehouse is historic property. And so then as it's being, reused, it needs to be documented, for historical purposes. Is your project part of that?
I would say yes. That's part of my motivation to make the documentary, is to document the history. It's certainly not the only way the history can be or should be documented, but that is definitely one of my goals.
I want to say something about the tobacco buyers, because Mr. Ross is my father-in-law, Bobby Ross, who's bought for Liggett Myers all those years. And I had the chance to interview him at the Durham History Hub this year in the story room. And if some of you, your story would be great there. If you haven't done that, go by the History Hub and take somebody with you and have a conversation and document it. A copy of it goes to the library here, and a copy goes to the History Hub. It's a great museum. But Mr. Ross told me many things that I didn't know before that interview about what it was like to be a buyer. I would love for him to tell you this, but he told me he wasn't going to. But he said, he bought tobacco for many years. But he said, I said, how did you know what to buy? He said, it's like a recipe. You were following a recipe. You needed a certain amount of this and a certain amount of that and a certain amount of that, and you got this kind of cigarette or a different kind of cigarette. And the buyers knew what they wanted. But the farmers had to be his best friend, just like they had to be your best friend, Mr. Stone. And so he used to come home with big cheeses and country hams and stuff like that, because they were sure he was going to pay more for their tobacco if they had given him a cheese for Christmas the years before. But it was quite an interesting story about what it was like to be a buyer. And my mother-in-law, Harriet King's father, was also a tobacco buyer in the generation older than this, and was in the ad that was in Look magazine, is that right? Many years ago, with a picture of them buying tobacco. Life magazine. So that's my little piece of the story.
Bobby, you need to give us a little speech. Okay, well, we sort of grew up in that warehouse together.
Oh, thank you. Walker and I, we grew up in this business in a big way. I remember his father, his uncle, and remember him well. Followed sale in Liberty Warehouse many years. At that time, I was head buyer for Liggett Myers Tobacco Company, and like Walker told you, had three sets of buyers going. And it was a busy time, and it was a very prosperous time during the tobacco season. It was activity, and the opening days of all sales, where you had every kind of yahoo that sold anything from socks to whatever it may be.
Snake oil. Got a bottle of that.
That's where the money was. The farmers got paid. Walk up, from the warehouse, they paid the farmers right when you completed the sale. And Margaret, God love her, she'd be up there looking after the money and writing the checks. And she really, it was a great time. And I have always been disappointed see it go down the hill like it was. 'Cause at one time it was a very proud, was proud to be a tobacco bar. Instead of, as a lot of part goes, somebody say, "What do you do?" I'm a peanut farmer. You don't want to. It just wasn't looked at it once the government got into it in this way, and they decided the best thing to do for everybody. So, maybe it was. I don't know, but I stopped smoking a long time ago. But I was smoking 4 packs a day. And I'm 87 now. Don't tell me they'll kill you.
Well, they don't kill everybody.
No, they don't. Walking out with two to toughen up the tea.
Yeah, I smoked for 40 years.
Been
Quit cold turkey.
That's the truth.
That's amazing.
The last day of just another day. So okay, you see, we start the auctions. Tobacco was started in Georgia and South Carolina, and it would go probably in Georgia 6 weeks, and then come up to South Carolina. It would start, and after that, then it'd be down east, and up in the middle belt, Durham, and out to the Burley, which is Burley tobacco, a different type of tobacco. But the whole thing ended usually around the first of February. And so we were on the market approximately 6 months out of the year, and got a lot of comment and everything. Hey, you don't work for 6 months out of the year, yeah.
The buyers played golf the rest of the time.
Well, Walker was out trying to get to all the farmers he can, and that's what he would do during the off season. He would go out and visit these farmers, say, "Bring your tobacco to me," and look at the tobacco and help them and all that. It was an exciting time, and so tobacco's a dirty word now, but it's unfortunate I'm still pro-tobacco. Walker, you always good to see you.
Thank you, Bobby. Appreciate that little message.
Well, I've got a question for either Mr. Ross or you, Walker. How did the caller, the person who you none of us could understand,
The auctioneer.
the auctioneer, who brought him in? Did you have your own auctioneer?
The warehouseman hired the auctioneer. And the way to understand him is start spending money on the sale, and then you learn real quick.
Okay.
What he's saying.
Okay.
You'd understand.
Yes, I would. Another question?
I don't really have a question. I wanted to tell you a funny story. I grew up on a tobacco farm here in Durham, and we moved to that farm when I was about 5, and I went to my first auction at about 5 or 6, and I think my dad wasn't getting real good prices that day because at some point I said, "Daddy, what's that man singing?" And he said, "He's singing the blues."
He'd have got you a better price if he just sat you on the pile of tobacco.
He did do that. He did do that.
I figured he did.
The other thing that I wanted to tell Mr. Ross is that my dad got wised up after a couple of years, and he started having a pig picking every fall for the buyers and graders, and we came to call it a barbecue.
You named it right.
I would like for Andrew to talk a little bit more about how Liberty Arts kind of took off once you got into Liberty Warehouse.
How Liberty Arts got
Mhm.
off, or how my business took
Well, how your business took off.
Okay. Well, we had space concerns in our old building. I was subletting from Vega Metals, and my good friend Jimmy Alexander was also subletting, and and it was really just a matter of not having enough room for everybody to do their work. They had just started Cricket Forge, and so they were expanding and doing some more commercial work, wholesaling, and I'd been out of school for several years, and my business was doing pretty well. And Jimmy had decided to start doing metal work, and so we were it was just getting compressed in the Hunt Street building that Vega Metals is in currently, and the opportunity of moving into 2,400 square feet, which is what was downstairs approximately, just afforded us a lot of opportunities. I had a project that I was doing for Light Up Durham that involved some large pieces that there just wouldn't have been room to do them in the Hunt Street location, and so Walker was generous and offered the space, and we sort of slowly transformed it and did some infrastructure work, as did everyone who moved in. I mean, I think one of the issues that sort of didn't get a lot of attention when discussions were happening about these reduced rates that everybody had, and how cheap it was for the tenants in the warehouse prior to the roof collapse, was that all of the people who moved in, the scrap exchange did a huge infrastructure upfit with their own money to put in air conditioning and do a lot of electrical work, and we did the same thing. We ran gas lines and lighting and upfitted our office. Tim Werrell put in a bathroom and did a lot of work. So, if you look at it from one perspective, yes, we got very, very reasonable rent, but the building that we were moving into was really just a shell that we did an enormous amount of personal investment on. And at that point, I mean, there really wasn't a whole lot going on downtown in that particular area. Durham Central Park, Kurt Eshelman and Alan Wilcox had this sort of idea for a park, but I mean, it was just a bunch of weeds. There were some storage buildings and other things, but it was very barren down there when we committed a lot of our resources, and Walker was certainly willing to help us out, but it was upward of $400,000 got invested in combination of what the scrap exchange did, what we did, what Tim Werrell did, the investment that CCB made for the foundry. That's a lot of money, and at that point it was people were really sort of sticking their neck out. A lot of people were sticking their neck out to have a vision for the future of the neighborhood, and I think that's an important point that may not be sort of front and center, but it was a lot of work. It was also a lot of fun. I mean, we did really have a camaraderie amongst all of the tenants down there. We were kind of heading off into the great unknown.
Family.
Yeah, and we helped each other out. One day a truck on a Friday afternoon was trying to make a delivery upstairs, and they drove into the door, and Rick Hamlet and I stayed for several hours into the evening putting things back together, and we really kind of took care of each other down there. It was a family. It really was.
And tell us a little bit where ARP is now, where you moved to transitioned after Liberty Warehouse.
Well, I did temporary quarters over at the old Southern States building that Al Frega owns. I was in there for about 6 months, and then Richard Porter owns a building over off of Trinity Avenue, and I moved my studio in there about 2.5 years ago. So it was Comfort Engineers and Durham Roofing Company. So it's across from the American Legion Post number 7 between Avondale and Roxborough.
He's got an upscale place now. It really looks nice. But when he rented from me, it was raw.
There was one kind of blues mentioned a minute ago, and I noticed that Carol started the film with a blues tune, and I had the privilege once of meeting Mr. John D. Holman, who told me that he got his start playing in a tobacco warehouse. Yeah. And there's been a mention of the rich culture and so forth of that scene, and I was wondering if that's going to be a part of the film and what memories that might spark.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. That is definitely an area that I'm going to explore in the film because I want to capture the entire lifespan from the early days all the way up till now. And the blues, it's a huge part of that time. So I hope there will be more blues music and hopefully with some local musicians. That's sort of just some placeholder music at right now. And I want to make another comment about the film that certainly not obvious from the clips that you saw. I mean, I got interested about liberty, and that's the sort of micro story. And as I've gone along and the story of liberty is now becoming part of the story of the revitalization of downtown Durham. The macro story is going to be about the changes that are happening in downtown. And I'm going to explore that from all angles because I think a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about how they feel about all the big apartment buildings that are going on. I think for some folks, they think, do we need these? And for other folks, they think, this is great. And I think it's very interesting about how we're continuing to evolve downtown. So that is another area that I'm going to explore that will, to give the context of what's happened with liberty over the years.
Mr. Stone, I have a question, and I'm going to start with, I guess, some background info. I'm originally from Greenville, North Carolina, which of course has a big tobacco history. Also with, oh gosh, I have to eat the thing. Like Ficklin, as in Ficklin Dowdy Stadium, and Imperial, and other warehouses there. And so I have a lot of family members that worked in tobacco warehouses. And one of the things that they've told me is that as an African American, you couldn't get a job in a tobacco warehouse unless somebody else spoke for you or you already had family members that worked there. And so Durham has, I guess, a large, an African American history that we all sort of know about. But one of the things that I don't hear a whole lot about is how that related to tobacco and even especially auctioning of tobacco and maybe the sort of jobs that African Americans held. Did they help unload the trucks? What sort of things did they do? How did they get those jobs? Was it the same sort of thing where you had to have somebody sort of stand up for you? Could you share a little bit about that?
Well, back in those days, I guess I had as many black friends as I did white friends, and a lot of them worked with me in the warehouse, and a lot of them grew tobacco. And so I became pretty close to a lot of them. And long towards the last, you're right, there weren't many tobacco buyers that were black, but long towards the last, you'd hear one here and there. And they were beginning to get involved in the buying end of it. I don't think I ever heard of a black auctioneer, but it was just those days, and they were beginning to change, but all of a sudden the auction system went away. But we didn't see color in the warehouses. Everybody was good friends, black or white. That's the way it was with me.
Mr. Ross?
Bobby? One thing in connection with the subject you're just talking about. we had, as Walker did, we'd go to all these auctions and had many black tobacco farmers. And I never even thought about when I was buying tobacco the years I did buy. I never even thought about who sold that tobacco, whether it's black, white, yellow. It's tobacco. He's a good tobacco farmer, or what wasn't too good. But black and white did not even enter in my mind, and I don't think the other buyers either in any way during that time. And I just want to get the record straight on that.
We've been talking about the history of the buildings and what could be done with them. Someone I know who's an architect in town who had looked at the buildings, and I don't know if it was for you, Mr. Stone, or not, but there was discussions before about whether the buildings could have been adaptively reused and not torn down. Had you ever looked into that, or what were the considerations?
Well, I was getting old, and I really didn't want to change into something else. I did change to sort of fit what was happening. I did start renting out space, but that's sort of as far as I wanted to go as far as redoing a building. Oh, had I kept it, I would have probably had to put a new roof, which would have cost several $100,000, and I was out of debt, and I didn't want to go back in. So when the Yankees came along, I sold it to them.
Okay. I'm totally not an architect and don't understand many architectural principles, but there was there's several architects on the Durham Central Park Board, and during that period of time when there was some consideration being given to, well, can we do something else with it, keep the structure. One of the things that the architect said at that time was that it was going to be very difficult to get light into that building. When you have a building that goes from one street to another street and it's that long, it just made the upfit of it terribly difficult and extremely expensive.
What y'all know what's going to happen to the wood? There are these amazing wood beams in there.
Sid, do you know what Clancy and Thays plans to do with any of the wood? There's some great big heart pine posts in there, and it would please me a lot to see some of that wood reused for good causes.
All right, do we have any additional questions? And if not, Walker wants to make a little statement. And
I'd just like to thank all of you for coming tonight, and Carol and Andrew for doing such a good job all of their lives, and I appreciate y'all's interest in Old Liberty. Thanks for coming.